It's 2025 and the year could be a defining moment for Africa. The continent is at a critical juncture as it faces deepening poverty, widening inequality and the urgent threat of climate change, all coming as the 2030 deadline looms for the Sustainable Development Goals. So how can Africa's challenges be addressed while leveraging its vast potential in a way that promotes sustainability? It's definitely a tough question to answer, but we're going to do just that. This is Insights from Africa. I'm Bronwyn Seaborn, and on this episode we discuss Africa's sustainable future. Standard Bank not only wants to help their clients achieve their sustainability goals, but the bank itself has sustainability goals as well. And here at their headquarters, their office is a 5-star rated green building, and so provides the perfect place for us to sit down with the bank's head of sustainability, Boitumelo Setlatswe. Boitumelo, thanks so much for joining us here on Business Day TV. So I'd argue just about 5 years ago, sustainability, or as we know today, ESG, was kind of a nice to have or a small mention at the boardroom level. And yet now it's really become a focus. There are debates about it, there are discussions about it, and there's real interrogation of what sustainability really means. Walk us through that progression.
Bronwyn, I think you're absolutely correct, and it really shows an evolution of how we've thought about these issues over time. If you rightly say, if we looked at boards and what they discussed, I think they would discuss the issues of sustainability and particularly ESG quite disparately. So you talk about labor practices, you might talk about your environmental footprint, you might talk about certain governance issues. But what we have seen over the last 5 years or so is really the ramping up of this. And I think there are a number of drivers for that, including the expectations of our stakeholders across the board. They expect us to be really thinking very hard about the impact that we have on society, on the environment, on our people, and also just, I guess, a lot of the policy and regulatory direction that we're seeing. And for ourselves, this is true. About 5-6 years ago now, the Standard Bank Group looked at refreshing our ESG approach and our sustainability approach, and I think it has really brought it top of mind for everyone across the organization.
Well, speaking to that, Standard Bank did set a goal of mobilizing 250 billion rand by 2026 for such sustainability initiatives. We sit just 1 year out from that. Where are you in terms of reaching that goal?
So this is an immense commitment that we've made, and we are really tracking well to achieve it. By the end of the half of 2024, we'd funded 127 billion. So we are on our way, and I think what we are really looking is to say what is the impact of this mobilization that we have been undertaking, and also to think about how can we review and relook at these targets and what we are mobilizing. And I think this is really pushed and given impetus to by our sustainable finance framework that we have, and just being very clear that we want to make sure that we're making an impact across social, across green, across supporting our clients in their transition.
Is 250 billion rand a small target? I mean, I know it's billions of rands, right? But in the greater scheme of things, put it into perspective for us, does 250 billion rand just scratch the surface?
So I think we all fully realize that the needs for Africa in particular to reach and be able to fund the SDGs and sustainable development, we speak about in the region of 1.3 trillion. And this is well recognized that there's a huge gap. And I think it's important to say that from the perspective on the continent, I think our contribution is quite significant. And I think it also speaks to how we need relevant stakeholders to be pulling in. And this is where we speak about the issues of blended finance and the like, to say that we need to galvanize our resources if we are really to meet these goals. And I think for us as well, we are consistently always thinking about how we can raise our level of ambition. And we look forward to being able to give progress against these targets and hopefully share with you what else we'll be doing.
We definitely look forward to getting those insights. But in terms of the funds you have mobilized, where are they going towards mostly? What kind of efforts and funds are those funds going towards? Are we seeing it in power? Are we seeing it in social development? Give us a sense of where that money is going exactly.
So I think the issue around energy is really the most critical, as we've seen. So a lot of our focus is on supporting renewable energy. And we can really say that if we look at our funding over the last few years, last year we could say that for every R1 that we had put in fossils, we put R5 in renewable energy. So really quite a significant shift that we are making. But over and above looking at renewable energy, we really try to ensure that we are supporting social projects as well. So looking at affordable housing, looking at education, financial inclusion, and making sure that even when we think about the E and environmental, we're not only looking at emissions and that like, but we're also thinking about how can we start thinking about nature solutions for pollution, so a whole list of activities, the blue economy, all of these things that we're starting to think about as eligible criteria for our sustainable finance mobilization.
And so really an interconnectedness, right,
100%.
and a holistic approach that needs to be taken when we look at sustainability.
This is very true. And for us, what we have done is we've always used these global frameworks as a starting point. So our approach to sustainability is really anchored in looking at the SDGs, looking at the national development plans of the countries we operate in, looking at the NDCs, and Agenda 2063, really understanding what are the challenges on the continent and how can we then step in to realize the opportunity in solving for the challenges. And so that's why when we look at sustainability, we look at it holistically. We try to say, how do we manage the risk, but how do we maximize the positive impact? And we look at that across multiple areas, which are financial inclusion, looking at climate change, mitigation and adaptation. We also look at enterprise growth and development and infrastructure, which is a huge gap across the continent.
If we talk about this holistic approach and looking at the interconnectedness, and you highlight how energy has really come to the fore as an area in which we need to address sustainability, that leads us to this idea of a just transition, right? And we need to take a look at it very carefully because green energy is great. It's the goal, but it shouldn't come at the cost, really, of millions of jobs, right?
This is absolutely correct. And I think this is why it's very important to be pragmatic and to really be clear that when we speak about a just energy transition, we need to focus on just, which is equitable. How are we ensuring that we're not leaving people behind or exacerbating a lot of the challenges that we already know? And transition, it will take time. And so this is really a very critical thing. We want to ensure that we're enabling the energy transition for the African continent. And I think it's important to reflect on what we know are the statistics that everyone speaks about, the energy deficit on the continent, the developmental needs, the historical small contribution to emissions. But I think what is really important is also thinking about that developing markets are likely 4 times to be impacted more than developed nations. So it's important to put that into context and also to understand that we're speaking about a fair contribution to how we decarbonize. And that's very important that we understand that for developed nations, for Africa in particular, what the trajectory of transition will look different than it will in other markets.
Talking about that different path of transition, does it put a bank like Standard Bank in a tricky position? Because there seems to be so much more to weigh up in terms of capital allocation when it comes to looking at sustainability, because you can't just say, oh, this is a green energy project, tick, done. Oh, these are fossil fuels, we're not going there, because where capital goes means that will be developed. So what kind of tricky position does this put banks in terms of weighing all of this up?
It is a balancing act, but I believe that we are quite clear because of the context that we operate in. So that's the starting point. We speak that Africa is our home, we drive our growth. That's where we start off as. Africa's the context that we look at. And also very clear that we are trying to ensure that throughout this, we support our clients, and our clients create the demand for what the products and the services that we offer them. And so it's very critical that we are taking them along the journey, and that we are supporting them, particularly in sectors that we believe to be high emitting and hard to abate. We need to continue to support these clients responsibly. And that also means that there needs to be a heightened level of due diligence, of really prudent risk management, so that we understand what our clients are getting up to, we understand what their transition pathways are, and therefore we can all collectively meet the goals that we have.
You talk about collectively meeting the goals, and we've spoken a lot about what banks are doing, what Standard Bank is doing, but you also need the state to come to the party.
This is absolutely true, and we are facing a time at the moment where it seems there's a lot of policy uncertainty, and I think this is where we need to understand that there are multiple cogs that need to come together to realize a just energy transition, and that means that policymakers need to be clear in providing the right direction, and this is particularly important for the real economy sectors to be able to drive the right incentives for these companies to be able to transition. And we also need the right level of regulation. There's a lot of standardization that's coming down the way within the sustainability space, from reporting to disclosures. And I think it does help us to create a bit more uniformity and clarity, but it really needs a very clear direction to be set so that everyone can understand what role they have to play.
Well, as we wait for all of that to play out, I focused a lot on you funding sustainability, but it's more than funding for Standard Bank, right? There's a whole other host of things that Standard Bank does that supports sustainability as well. Walk us through some of that.
So for us, it's really about wanting to do the right business the right way and making sure that we are this trusted partner for the African continent. And so beyond just financing, there are a lot of programs that look to support businesses, enabling businesses to essentially graduate from being small, medium to larger businesses. We support education through funding underserved students. We also really think about how we can support new and interesting startups so that they can also create opportunities in the new sort of evolving sectors. And so really thinking about how do we also make sure that we are enabling impact. And for us, I would say that's the evolution of sustainability, to really be able to move from what are the inputs to say what is the real world impact. So how many gigawatts have you been able to really finance? How many kilometers of road? And to really speak to the number of people that are impacted by what you're doing.
Let's leave it there, Boitumelo. Thanks so much for your time. Well, as Boitumelo says, it's not only financing. The bank looks at various other ways to commit itself to sustainability in Africa. And this is the case for many organizations as we all try to build a prosperous and inclusive future for Africa. And after the break, we take a look at how Sustainability Africa is doing just that. So stay tuned.